Hi, I'm Mel, this is Matt, and we're going to talk about how to create emotional engagement in narrative and game design. We're going to start with a short introduction. So I'm Mel Taylor. I moved here to Australia from Germany a few months ago to join the awesome indie community here. And back in Germany, I was working on a game called Orwell, and I'm an independent artist and game designer, and I was working in Hamburg with my team from Osmotic Studios on Orwell. So,
Cool. Hi, I'm Matt Torbiani. I'm a game designer and programmer from Adelaide, and I made a game called Hacknet and its expansion Labyrinths. Before we go on, if you have any questions for the end, I'll be asking for the audience as well. But if you also want to tweet to either of us, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, I'll be checking out for questions as well. Okay, so this is my game Hacknet, and it also had an expansion called Labyrinths.
and Orwell is a game about the themes of online privacy and security versus the freedom of putting your data out there. And we also made a follow-up game for Orwell that focuses more on media manipulation and fake news called Ignorance is Strength. And we're going to use these games as a case study now for talking about emotional engagement. So a short overview of what we are going to be talking about. It's basically the structures of the games themselves. So how to start strong, introducing themes and atmosphere, how to teach people the mechanics and the controls without losing immersion. And then I'm going to talk about the details of dramatic composition and pacing that we used in Orwell. And for the end, that needs to be strong, rewarding, and meaningful. So first of all, I wanted to talk about what we mean by emotional engagement. So what we don't mean is making games addictive, obviously. So games are always manipulative. And they always sort of play with players' perceptions. And so what we want to do is we want to make the experience meaningful. We want to make the players engage and think that, this has actually relevance to the themes and the intentions of the game, and not engaging them for engagement itself, so just to keep them playing. And what we are also going to do is we are going to use the term game design for the mechanics of the game and narrative design for the plot design. So it's not always so good to keep these things separated, but for the sake of clarity, we're going to do that here.
So before we go ahead with that, I want to make it extra clear that we're going to use the word manipulation a fair bit. And I think that word's kind of weirdly cursed at the moment because people see it's just a bad thing. But all communication, I think, is inherently manipulative. You're trying to get something into the other person's brain. I think very good game design has to be deeply manipulative in the true definitional sense of the word, in that you're trying to push an emotional state onto a person because you're trying to give them a certain kind of experience. And I think you can manipulate people for good, you can manipulate people to be more happy, for example. So I'm going to be using that word, and I just want to make sure it's very clear what we meant by that.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. So starting strong, we're going to talk about how to draw the player into your world and introducing themes and atmosphere, establishing long-term goals, and making the premise of the game clear as early as possible. And one thing that Orwell and Hacknet have in common there is the zeroth person strategy. That's a term that Matt taught me, which I really like. So the players basically play as themselves in both games, and they are a person in front of a computer, and the game treats them as such. Now, in terms of introducing themes and atmosphere, just wanted to show you a short video, if that's possible. There you go. So this is the startup of Orwell. And the second the game is started up, it is clear that this is an operating system, and the layout is inspired by Windows XP, so something that everyone knows, or at least people who were born in the 80s. And so what we're doing here is we're using something that everyone knows, and that makes it as clear as possible what we are trying to communicate. This is an operating system, and the player is sort of employed by the government and starts their workday in starting up this operating system. Another thing we do before the game actually starts is we sort of force the player physically to sign a kind of contract. You have to agree that you are going to adhere to the laws and jurisdictions of the nation, which is the fictional country whose government employs you, basically, and that the whole game plays in. And you don't even know the laws, but you have to agree to them. And basically what we do is we manipulate the player into sort of a state of mind that says, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for the data that I'm passing on to the government. And it was very important to us to expect the player to think about this decision consciously. Another thing is, since OWL is this fictional operating system, we used a lot of things in UX and UI design that is already known. So using taskbars or, for example, logos as menu buttons and icons that are known. So it's very tempting to try to create your own new layouts or icons and stuff, but it's always it's unnecessary to try to teach this to the player again. So you really should build on that, on this opportunity.
Yeah, so this is Hacknet's starting screen. For anyone that lacked Hacknet, I'm very sorry, I'm about to pull the curtain back a bit here. In terms of starting strong, the whole intro to the game is all about getting players into the right mindset. And people have a lot of subtleties in how they perceive things depending on how they're just thinking in general. And a lot of what I wanted to do at the start, and what OWL does quite well at the start, is pulls people into a certain kind of mindset that lets them better appreciate the game. So I needed a way for players to type in their name, and this screen is functionally exactly the same as you start a game of Zelda and you type in what your name is, except I made it so that you type in a password, and then as soon as you hit confirm, it just throws it away. It doesn't care, and the whole thing was just to make it feel like it actually does use it in a later thing. And I was going to have it come back to bite you at the end of the game when someone would hack in and tell you your own password, but I figured someone would play it on Twitch and would accidentally type their real password in. I'd dox them in front of everyone, so I had to cut it. But this was designed because I needed the player to have a name, and I just got them to type in a password as well and do the whole confirmation thing, because it started to get them into that right kind of mindset. And as I'll explain in just a minute, the tutorializing process for Hacknet is very difficult. And if players aren't going into it with the right mindset, they just can't pass it all. So this is a very subtle, strange thing, but changing the select your name screen to look like this and have them type in a password that is functionally pretty useless increased the pass rate of my tutorial a lot. So these subtle things have a big impact. All right, so the tutorialization, teaching without losing immersion. You want to take this one?
Yeah, so Matt is going to talk about how he made the tutorial in Hacknet. And so one thing that was important here is to stay in fiction. So making the interactions meaningful from step one and not have sort of separated tutorial that way you think, okay, this is just not the real game, but something else. And another thing is, try to teach without killing immersion and engagement. So reward as early as possibly and start as simple as possible. And then one thing that I already mentioned, using known UI lessons.
Okay, so this is what Hacknet looks like, and it's deliberately designed to be very scary and intimidating to look at. It's meant to look like if you're just walking past it as something that's very unapproachable and extremely technical and complicated, which made the process of tutorializing it very difficult. I went through dozens and dozens of iterations restructuring the tutorial, hundreds of individual versions that I had tested to get this to a point at which most people could pass it, even people that were aggressively not trying to. And I'm very proud of how it came out. So let's go over how it works. This is an original screenshot of the game with the original first tutorial step open. You'll notice there's like a whole lot of stuff going on. Players were overwhelmed with information right away. So the first big game was to remove everything that wasn't immediately necessary. We got to get rid of this, and a bit of this, get rid of this. All right, so this first step is click the green circle. You can see in this one, it originally started having a bunch of stuff already visible. And it's like, click the green circle, but that was far too difficult. So now there's only one thing that you can click on this screen. It's unfortunately also way too difficult. So this sentence is way too long. It says you can type in help to get help, but you can't. There's the circle's like all the way down there, and they've like just booted into the game and like have no idea what to do. So this is the new one. It's about as empty as I could possibly make it. There's the actual startup sequence after you type in the password has just a lot of breathing room. It wants to like ease you into the fact that other things are going to appear on screen, so it shows you where things are going to appear with some like sort of booting up text in the terminal on the right. That's clear, like this is where like all the text is going to go, and then it just flashes everything out and just has this one button. I figure after doing this a lot of revisions that that's about the amount of text you can get away with having on a single tutorial step for them to read. The blue text here is just some like general hype up stuff. I should explain the sort of person that this tutorial is made for. When I'd take Hacknet to conventions, and I took it to a lot of conventions, you'd get these sort of people that would come past that were clearly not interested in being good at this game, they're not interested in the game itself. They would be like teasing their friends, be like, haha, I should play this, because of the way it looked, they thought their friends like wouldn't be able to play it. It was almost like a dare to be like, haha, play this game that's obviously impossible and you won't be able to beat. And I wanted to set up a system of tutorialization where the first step was so impossibly easy that they couldn't not pass it without ridicule. And then the second step should just be just the slightest bit more complicated than that. And by the time, like before they knew it, they'd be like, their friends would look away and they'd come back and they'd be typing stuff in and it'd be working. And from their friend's perspective, it would look like they'd just magically become this super hacker, which was like the tutorialization goal. And I felt like I got a lot closer than I expected to with this sort of thing, but it was absolutely critical. Like if we go back to this one, if you have it be just click the green circle, no, they're out immediately, right? That green circle is like far too complex to locate on this screen. No matter how bright it is, like this is a very upsetting problem for me, like where like people would sit down, they'd read this and they'd be like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, you got to click the green circle. And they're like, which one? Like, this is like 10 people would have said that to me. And I was like, all right. So I've just got the one button, you just got to click the button and then it says continue. And then it's like, oh, sorry, I should have said this one. This slide was up. I forgot I had this one. All right, you click the button and it gives you a big sound effect and it flashes and it's like, yeah, you're a hacker. Now you can click the green circle. Yeah, so you want to build this series of successes in a row so people feel comfortable with like, you want them to ease into this mindset of being like, I feel like I can probably do the next step. And as soon as they start thinking that they should be able to do this instead of that they shouldn't, that's when you can start teaching them things. Like this is the first bunch of steps of the tutorial is just click on the right button. So the first one is click on the only button that's there that says click me. The second one is click on the green circle. Again, the only clickable thing on the screen. And now that I've had 2 successful clicks in a row, I can get away with the bold request of saying click on this named button with several buttons on the screen. So right now, there's no like gameplay here. This gameplay is not like contextualized and hacking or anything. This isn't what the game's about. This is just like a much smaller, simpler game of click the right button. And it's doing that just to establish a pattern of success that the player can start to feel more comfortable with. And this might blow past in like 2 seconds, but making it so that they don't feel like they have an excuse to fail any particular given step especially the first two, is critical towards easing people, especially the most hostile tutorial players, into feeling like this is something that they can do. And your tutorial, a big part of it, is easing players into the right mindset so that they want to learn more. All right, so after that, it's the smallest rectangle on the screen. This is another one, so they just do 2 challenges of click the right button, the disconnect one. This will remove more information. And now it's click the blue circle. This is a little bit more complicated. This is actually this step's more complicated than this step. And I've removed information from the screen, and this instruction is simpler, which buys me time for this next step, which is much more complicated. So at this point, we're 6 successful clicks in, and I get to, this step basically just exists to do the hype up text. It's this actually does almost the exact same thing that Orwell does with the check the box being I'm going to follow all the country's laws, where I'm click the blue circle to break the law. And then you do that, and now you've got to run your first command from the terminal. And this will bring up the terminal, and it immediately looks scary. And if this was the first step, nobody would pass the tutorial. But because there's a pattern of success, the new press the right button one is you have to type the word in and press enter, and that's the button. And it feels like after this sequence of events, the game's about pressing the right button, which is sort of embarrassingly true about Hacknet. But now that you've established a pattern of this is doable, and you've bought a little bit of extra attention by making the previous step a bit easier and having a little bit of the hype up there, this is the big step where, and it's quite unassuming, but if players can pass this particular part of the tutorial, they're probably good for the whole demo. And if they're not going to like the game, they won't make it past you, which is good because you can eliminate people from your play base quite early, and once it looks intimidating. But this is the point at which they type in the command and they press enter, and it does a cool thing that their friends turn around, which is good. And now there's another one. This is another weird part of it where I needed this much text on the screen, but I couldn't afford it, right? If there was that much text up there normally, they'd just not read it at all. Players' eyes will start to glaze over it if there's too much. But if you just put a button that says hint and you have the other text come in and then fade out, they'll read that, and you can buy an extra sentence of attention by putting something beneath an extra button. So the pattern for this one is players will read the blue text first because it's blue. And they'll be I don't know how to do that. And they'll read some of the white text. They'll get about halfway through and they'll be forget this. That sentence is too big. So that text is just there to buffer. I don't expect players to read it. If they paid attention to the previous step, they should, ideally, if they're going to like the game, they'll make that little connection being you've got to do the thing. So you type the name of the thing into the box and you press enter. This is the fundamental of terminal commands. So if they're paying attention, they'll just type port hack in and press enter, and it will do it, and they'll feel like a legit genius. And if they can't, they press the hint button, which is actually important information, and the act of pressing the button gives you enough attention for them to actually read it. Because it's fading out, they'll have they'll read it with some urgency, and they'll absorb the information. So that's how you get it past that little one. Now there's just some flavor text and stuff. I'm skipping ahead a little bit here. There's just some more button pressing after this, but this is where we start to get into actual terminal navigation commands. So now I'm teaching a new command with that's go back, so it's cd ... As you can see here, it's not written in blue because after doing 2 instances of the action you need to take is always written in blue, and it has the password in it, people will just type out the entire word that's written in blue, no matter what it says in the tutorial, and press enter and be I don't know why it doesn't work. Human brains will latch immediately onto any pattern they can perceive. So I had to break that up very deliberately here by having the blue just being the action you want to perform, and requiring the player to read the white text to understand how to do it. It's taking longer than I thought, so I'm just going to speed through. This is a whole bunch of stuff right after that where it will teach more of the terminal commands, and then you can see that it will navigate, so they learn to type it out first, and then they notice that you can just press the buttons to do it, which will give them a bunch of shortcuts. And then by the end of the game, the rest of the game is basically trying to unteach that little step where it moves them back towards using the terminal. Yeah, fair bit here. Yeah, after you beat the tutorial, I basically do the whole tutorial again, but under the context of missions. So each mission will have like a little plus button, which will give you a little guide, which gives you the relevant parts of the tutorial again to perform it. And for the next like hour of the game, there will still be little guides that will come up to remind you of the certain parts of the tutorial you need to remember. Because so much of that initial session isn't about teaching players how to play the game, and definitely not how to be good at it. It's about getting them into the right mindset to think both, I can do this, and I want to learn how to do it better. And then the rest of the game can like teach them all of the finer points of it. Yep.
Yeah, so I guess it's important to say that Matt had a lot harder job to make the tutorial sort of accessible than Orwell, and Orwell it's super simple the way it's built up, and also it's just dragging and dropping data. So the way that Hacknet makes you feel is basically sort of, wow, I'm a genius, and Orwell sort of makes you feel like, oh, I'm an asshole. And yeah, I guess that's a kind of, you should really think about which emotions you want the player to go through when playing a game and which mindset you want to establish. So now I'm going to talk about the pacing and dramatic composition of the sort of the main part of the game and how we constructed that in Orwell. Just going to sort of skip through. This is, first of all, the game mechanics. This is just to illustrate sort of how we started out and how rough this was, and how we early, at a very early stage, established that the theme is freedom versus security. Sorry, this is in German, partly. Yeah, so you don't need to understand the details. It's just to show that how rough it can be at the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of go through from exciting to calm, which is very, very broad. I'm going to go through how we compose the pacing in Orwell. So Orwell is made out of 5 episodes, and it was important to sort of have a little more drama at the end of each episode, but also to change the pacing throughout the game to keep people engaged and to make it interesting. Now, from a mechanical point of view, the first thing you see in Orwell, it's a cutscene. It's different angles of security cameras, so it's mechanically not very interesting, but story-wise, which I'll get to later. And the next thing is the tutorial of the game. This is to illustrate sort of how we ended up with episode 1. After the player sort of gets into the whole mindset and knows the mechanics, knows, okay, what I'm doing is I'm dragging and dropping data into this profile that I create of people. There's a different kind of data that we basically teach the player about, which is a contradicting data chunk, and the player has to decide which of those to put into the system, basically. So one question the player asks, is this true? Is this something that I have found out that is the truth? And the other thing is, do I want to pass on this data to the government? So this is the end of episode 1, where the player actually sees that this might have a big consequence for the character, depending on which of these two I put in. Then at the beginning of episode 2, it gets a bit calmer again. The mechanics are basically learned, and the player sort of gets into the flow. Then throughout episode 2, the player gets more characters, and there's more depth added to the mechanics. Then in episode 3, we give the player a new tool. So mechanically, the change is a bit bigger now. And this is the insider. And basically, the player has 3 tools. So the first one is the reader, which is basically a web browser. The second one is the listener, where you can sort of read text messages and listen to phone calls. And the third one is the insider. And the first 2 you get really early, and the insider is unlocked in episode 3. And so what we do is the player can now see a lot more private things from the characters. For example, pictures on their phones, and also look at desktops from their laptops, Yeah, and then in towards the end of episode 3, we have a first sort of mechanical break. So all is a text-heavy game, and it's also very slow, so you can really work at your own pacing. And in episode 3, we have a first time-based event. So we really get the player out of this mindset of sort of working quietly and snooping through other people's photos and stuff like that, to a moment where the player has to do something on time. And that is during a phone call. So in episode 3, we have this very conflicted character, and basically at one point she runs from the police. And you have to, you sort of have to decide whether you want to tell the police where she is. And first of all, you have to find out where her position is, and then sort of decide whether you want her to be caught or not. And the most likely outcome in this situation is that she dies. And many players were really, it was a really tragic moment, and many players were really surprised by this. And so it had a very, very big effect, and it was one of the highlights, actually, of the game. Then in episode 4, we have, first of all, a sort of state of mind where things get calmer again. And then we have a second mechanical break where the player experiences connection loss. So basically, at the beginning of Orwell, the player feels very empowered. So you are able to decide things about other people's lives. You are really the person who is in power. And this is a sort of foreshadowing on how you could lose this power. And there's a hacker who sort of hacks into the system, and you don't know this at this point, but the connection to the server is gone, and you can't do anything, and it's just a few seconds, and then the connection is back, and nothing more. But it sort of interrupts the player and makes you really think about what's going on here. Then in episode 5, we actually have that's the final episode, so we have a strong change of pace, because now we have a sort of countdown. So we say, instead of the player just being able to drag and drop data chunks into the profiler, suddenly they have a limit of, 20 data chunks, and you have to find out something before this limit goes to an end. So this was something where many players told us afterwards they started to think much more about their decisions. And at the beginning of Orwell, it's sort of like, okay, yeah, name, address, sure, I'll pass all that on to the government, don't care. And then later it becomes more and more important, and you really see which consequences this data can have for the people. And so it really gets a lot more fast-paced towards the end. And then at the end of episode 5, we have a complete control loss, and a final decision where sort of the characters of the game go together in a call and basically find out that they are being watched. And there's this fourth wall break where they talk to the player and say, okay, you have to make a final decision on whose side you are. And the final scene is, again, mechanically not very interesting, but story-wise, the cutscene basically tells you what happens next and what outcomes your decision had. I'll go right on to the narrative design. So this is again to illustrate how we sort of plotted out the narrative beats of Orwell. What we did was we just put like post-its which character each episode focuses on and which information we had to communicate to the player story-wise, and how the player would find this out. So, narratively, at the beginning, the cutscene is the inciting incident. So it's sort of to draw the player in, but also to immediately tell them, okay, the security cameras show this bombing, and you have to sort of find out who the perpetrator of this bombing was, and that's the main premise of the game. So the next thing is in episode 1, the first character that we are surveilling is called Cassie, and she's kind of the red herring, which is a sort of story distraction from what the story sort of mainly focuses on. And she is a very sort of superficial character. She blurts everything out on Facebook, and she's pretty easy to sort of see through her intentions, but obviously she's not the perpetrator because that would be too easy. But she's an interesting character for the first part where you don't know what the story is about. The next thing is that we add depth. So in episode 2, we have 3 new characters, and we basically find out that Cassandra is not the main person we're looking for, and there's much more going on in the background, and then we get the player curious about this. And then in episode 3, we introduce this new character, which basically builds up to this mid-game highlight. And this character is a very conflicted character, and her name is Nina, and she's a former soldier. So Nina is a single mother, and she's very unhappy with the government and how, how this whole surveillance thing takes on. And she's very sort of anti-government, but also she's very worried about her son, and she has to work in low-wage jobs. And so we find out a lot of private things about her and can really relate to her. And then the moment where this chase happens, that's where the mechanics work really well together with the story. Because if we hadn't gotten to know Nina so well throughout episode 3, then this chase would not have such a big impact. So basically, the outcomes are that she either gets arrested, she dies, or she is just gone. And many players were really upset about this. And they were like, oh my God, what have I done to her son, and things like that. And if you hadn't gotten to know her so well, you could have thought, okay, she's just, I don't know, an anti-government person. Why should I care about her? So it was really important to get to know this character. In episode 4, the depth is increased again, and it gets a bit calmer, and the gameplay sort of goes on. And basically, story-wise, we have a few revelations here, and we sort of notice that we're getting closer to what we want to know. Then we have a sort of second all is lost moment by the end of episode 4, where the Orwell advisor suddenly disappears. So the advisor is basically the person who is your superior, and he's called Symes, and he also gives tutorial instructions, and he's basically a pop-up window. And many people found him annoying at the beginning, or thought that he was an AI. And then at the end of episode 4, we find out he had a pregnant fiancée, and depending on your decisions, he can get shot. So some players were really sad that he was gone, although he was annoying at the beginning. So it was interesting to see how attached they got to him, how much they liked him, although not everyone liked him at the beginning. So the climax is the phone call, and as I said, this is the moment where the characters sort of get together in a call, and you get to witness this call, and they make decisions about sort of what to do with you. And so the feeling goes from the person who judges others to being the person who is judged. And we kind of turn all of this around, story-wise. And the next thing is showing the player the consequences depending on their decisions. So what we did was we didn't only take into account what the players decided in the end, which is basically the decision, do I want to be loyal to my employer, so on the government side, or do I want to go against the system and bring down Orwell? And the thing is that the decisions throughout the game are also important. So it's kind of a modular ending. And we wanted to show the player that many things can happen after they made this decision. So that's basically what this cutscene shows.
Before I go on to music, I will quickly talk about how Hacknet follows its own curve, where Orwell uses the big narrative beats to increase the feelings of the player about the questionable stuff they're doing and how big those decisions are. Hacknet relies for emotional engagement really strongly on two pillars. The first is synchronizing music and using music effectively in sync with pressure to make players feel like very tested. And the second is establishing systems that they are trained to feel comfortable in and then subverting those systems. So much like this graph, relatively early on in Hacknet, I've tried to time it so that it was when the player felt most comfortable with their skill set. So one of the weird truths about Hacknet is that its mechanics are very, very simple. And I needed to sort of hide this through use of narrative and like engagement stuff. So once the player has like mastered the basic set of like lock and key system, which is the hacking system in the game, they will get hacked, and their like entire screen is just completely wiped out, and they've just got the little terminal line like flashing at the bottom. And like the answer is they have to use just the terminal to like hack back in without any of their displays or anything, and get all their stuff back. Now this is a much bigger challenge than they've been given previously, so you need to buy the attention that the player is going to spend on that. And so in my case, I just took the easiest route and like inspired them by revenge. So you get like a really rude email beforehand, like I'm going to hack you, big nerd, and then they do, and then like you like are fueled by wanting to get back at them to try and learn how to do that, because it's a very intimidating thing. So Hacknet relies really strongly on the problems not actually being complicated, but being very intimidating. So they're very satisfying to overcome. And you can encourage people to address intimidating problems by getting them, first of all, emotionally invested in them, but by building up a pattern of success, subverting that success, and wanting them to get back to where they were. The actual player skill curve takes a massive spike up at that point if they get past it, and most do, mostly because of that rude email. And that was like really core to what made, like that's basically the moment that a lot of players quote as being when they really like understood and began to really like the game. But something that's more easily applicable to different kinds of game is music. And this is so important, and I don't even think that I've like properly mastered it, so I feel a little bit fraudulent talking about it here, but I do think it needs to be talked about more, so I'm going to anyway. Music is like directly linked to player emotions. You can just like play some sad piano and people will feel sad about whatever's going on. It's like disturbingly easy how well it works. And you can use silence in like the same case if you don't have silence going on in your game anywhere else. So if you're like flooding your environment with like ambience, or I use like drones and static sounds quite a lot. Drones of like different pitches, especially if you have two different drones, then you play both at once and then you remove one of them. The players will like feel that absence as something that's going on. And then you can like build these small soundscapes and then just cut them really abruptly to make something really stand out. There's a particular moment in Hacknet that uses this, spoilers by the way, that uses this very strongly, where removing the music was like the main feature of that event. So there's like a pacemaker and you have to sort of like break it. And they'll have like the heart rate monitors just like beeping away. But like as soon as it starts to go haywire, the music will like, as soon as you start messing with it, the music will fade out and there'll just be like drones playing. And then the drones will like stutter and cut with the beats, so that like when it finally does like the beep out and like the really long beep out, you know, like in movies and stuff, it leaves it with just like absolute silence for the first time in the game. And that like silence itself, if you've been building up a soundscape, can be used as a really powerful track in and of itself. Use it sparingly though. So the important way to do this is that players aren't going to pay attention to your music unless you properly prime them to. And these parts are all equally important. So anticipation, wind up, and the drop and the beat, and use them all differently. So anticipation is basically removing sound and replacing it with like a drone or static sound, or more likely environmental sound, like environmental ambience. You want to be fading out or getting rid of whatever main melody or other music you have playing initially, priming the player for a wind-up, like, and then like delivering on that. So I'll go through the steps one by one. Anticipation, you remove the current music that's in the scene. You like create a blank slate, not silent, but you want like environmental ambience. Then once your action starts, you don't want it to just happen instantly. So like, let's say you're opening a door, and the door's got to be a really memorable moment to open. As you approach the door, you want to like kill whatever music is going on, like play just your environmental ambience, even crank that volume up just a little bit, but do this all smoothly so it's not like obvious or jarring. When you like perform the systematic action to open the door, don't have it just pop open. You want to play a wind-up sound. This can be the start of your track. If your track has like an appropriate length wind-up sound, make it less than 20 seconds. Or if it doesn't have an appropriate one, make sure it's got like a cut into the middle of the song on like one of the beats, so there's like a strong note that plays first, and then play just like a whooshing sound. What did I write down here for good ones? Like long drum hits that played backwards are good, like a big like wind whoosh up, but just a sound that like has like a curve that looks like a triangle going this way, right? Like any sound that sort of builds to something, and then you have like the drop. And the drop is just like the first big beat of the song, or when the song changes to like have the beat kick in. You all know what a drop is, right? So your first big drop is like very important, and that's when you want the action to happen, like the door will open for the first time, and you want that synchronized with a really overblown like effect. So if you're opening the door, the actual vista is like whatever is beyond the door, right? But for the drop, like that bar of music, you want to have it so that like just light just pours out of it so you can't see anything, because your brain will like work backwards and write in the fact that like, oh, it was opening to like this amazing vista, right? You don't want to have the vista displayed on the drop. You want to like overwhelm them for that one bar, and then let the first few like bars of the beat be where they can like soak it in. So in this way, you prime players to appreciate a certain moment, which is usually the start of a song, and then give them a couple of seconds to like appreciate that. And that's when they'll appreciate the like music and be actively thinking about it, because you've like removed other stimuluses and you've made them focus on this one thing. So I'll give some direct examples from Hacknet. I wanted when they first connected to this one particular server in the DLC to be memorable. And usually in key moments in Hacknet, the song will just change. So if the anticipation, once they're finished with the previous task that had given them access to it, they were going to be automatically connected in like 10 seconds. From the anticipation of finishing that last one, like finishing the last trial, there's some like narrative stuff that would just write out. It was basically just a buffer to let the player's mind reset out of action mode, and the song would fade out. I start playing my drones. Just look up some drone tracks, they're the best. Then I'd play like the wind up, which was just a big whooshing sound. I separated out this first like note that plays into that song in its own sample. So the first note plays at double volume. There's like, as soon as you connect to it, there's like a big like a loading spinner sort of thing, plays the wind up. Like it's literally just wasting time. It doesn't need to load, but it's there to like give players a second to breathe and be ready to appreciate the new song. Because I really like the song. I want players to like think about it more. So you remove the stimulus beforehand, you like wipe the slate clean, you do a big wind up to it, big emphasis on the beat, and then you have something that fades out over the first few bars to get them into that right mindset of being like, oh, I'm not in a rush, I can do this. And then I did the other thing where I don't do that with the beat, which is the biggest final mission thing. I had a huge song from Carpenter Brute that I was absolutely in love with. That has like a whole 30-second big like sort of sirens warm-up thing. And I really like that. The song was really expensive to license. And I wanted players to like notice it. So I had like the little program that synchronizes it, like that starts it up. You press the button, it starts playing the song. Like as soon as you start the little program that goes into the top left corner of the Hacknet screen, it wipes all your other music and like starts playing like a sort of static sound. Then as soon as you press the button to start it, you just have to sit there and watch it for like 20 seconds. And like for no reason other than I just wanted players to be feeling the anticipation for like as soon as that drop happens, and you can feel it happening because the song's really well composed. You can feel when it's about to happen. And then I just had the most like bombastic screen transition I could to really like sell that point. Like big target thingies come down to where you're connecting to, and like everything goes red. as the beat was going, every white element on the screen flashes to red down with the beat. So it's really just like pumping, and the screen's like going down. And this was like the big culmination of both elements of emotional engagement that really spoke to players in Hacknet, which was them feeling very pressured, and like the challenges presented to them were very complex. And the music synchronizing, bringing a lot of pressure and tension to the scene. I mean, you can do this with other moods. Like for the ending sequence, I made it like quite emotional and reserved, which matched the ending of the story. But for this moment, I built up a lot of tension, built up a lot of pressure, and then immediately challenged the player to overcome it, knowing full well that I'd been training them for like hours and hours with the rest of the game to be able to do it, so that it would feel very satisfying. And look, people on YouTube like it. They never write nice stuff. Right. Okay, so generally, wherever you can, match things to the beat. This just works so well. You can just make a little thing that just like records what BPM any of your songs are, and just be like, if it's 128 BPM, you just record the exact start time of the song, and then just calculate out when your next beat is, and then just delay it to play exactly then, and it just feels really cool. So just like add in tiny little delays. Like if you're like opening that door, you can calculate out, if you know like when something will happen on the beat, you can just make it take like half a second longer, and it would just feel like extra cool when it does. Holy Night uses a really neat trick, which has two songs playing at the same time, like always. They start both playing at the same time. One's just playing at 0 volume, so you know they're always in sync. And one's like the sort of action version with lots of drums, and it just fades that up whenever you like get into a fight. It's really simple, but it works really well. Silence is its own powerful trick if you use it sparingly. And yeah, get your composer to do remixes. Just ask them to do a cool remix and just throw it in a secret area or something, because that's worked out really well for me.
Yeah, so we're getting to the last part, the ending. So one really important thing is that you give the player something rewarding. You don't want to just sort of give them a bigger challenge than before, and that's it, and the same thing, but just a bit more. You want to give them something extra, something cool, maybe a mechanical twist, something that makes them feel like it was really worthwhile. And then strong visuals and sound. Kind of what Matt was talking about. Make it very emotional and make it so it matches your theme. And so this is something I want to emphasize regarding the ending. You should always have something that your game is sort of about, and that you emphasize at the end again, to sort of remind the player why he went through all of this, and also to ask yourself which questions do I want the player to ask them throughout the game, what do I want to have answered, or what do I want to have remain unsolved. So with Orwell, like I said, we had this phone call at the end, and basically if you killed or arrested characters, they won't be in this phone call, but they will be talked about. And what happens here is the hacker basically takes control again, and they go through all of the profiles that you created of these people, and they show, the hacker basically shows it to the people in this phone call. And they go like, oh my God, what has that person done? And depending on what you did, that's what you will feel like. And so basically our theme was security versus privacy. And what we are doing here is we are showing the player what they did throughout the game, but we are also asking, okay, what's your final decision after going through all this? On which side are you? And the player has both options. So we don't tell them this is the right ending and this is the wrong ending. We made a big point out of sort of leaving it up to the player. And so Orwell is a decision-based game. And we, since this was our goal, we really wanted to emphasize this towards the ending again.
Cool. Yeah, we're almost out of time, so some quick little ending points. Just be extremely conscious of how you do cuts in your music. If you're always fading in and fading out every track, it's always going to be weak. Like you can just time it to like when something big happens. You can have a different variant which starts at a different point in the song than its normal loop. So it starts on like the biggest hit, but just be conscious of it. Really think about it. Like go through your games, identify the moments that you want to become memorable, and try and have the music synchronize or start or change in a way that is deliberate, and use your wind-ups and your anticipation, your silence beforehand to really sell those points. Yeah, pay a special attention to this during your credits and ending, because after that is when your players are most likely to write your reviews and you want them to feel really like attached to the game, and music is like your best way of doing that. And yeah, just give them some time to digest stuff after the ending if you have a system that allows that sort of thing. Like just cutting straight back to the menu is a little bit like clunky. Like think about it like how you'd cut an ending to a movie, and give them something to talk about. Thank you very much. Okay, we probably have time for like 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, we're running into the morning tea, so if you guys, it's really up to you guys, I guess.
All right, like 1 question from the room, 1 from Twitter. You want to do the room one?
Yeah. No questions?
Hold on, I'm checking.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. You guys talked a lot about making sure that the like emotional narrative matches like the gameplay and stuff. I've always found testing players for their emotional reactions really hard. So how did you guys play test the emotional side of the engagement?
Yeah, that's not too easy.
Yeah, I just didn't. I don't know. I hoped.
But what was really cool was, we had an episodic release. So what we did at the beginning, we released 1 episode per week. And what we could do is we already watched Let's Plays while still working on the game. So creating the other episodes. And it was really interesting to see how the people reacted, although the game itself was not quite finished. So it's not like we were able to make major changes, but it was really cool to see the reactions while we were still working on it. And I would also say it's not like it's important, like exciting is good and calm gameplay is bad. It's the contrast that is the important thing. So if you have a really slow gameplay like in Orwell, you should use the opportunity to surprise the player at some points and to sort of really increase the pacing.
Yeah, I think usually when you sync up your music right and you have good beats, I don't know if it works like this for everyone else, but I can just feel when it's like right. Usually when you feel like it happens and it feels like, oh, I want to take a little video of it and send it to someone because I feel like this is cool. I think as long as you do the anticipation and wind up bits correctly, and you're making sure that it all hits like right on the beats, it like always feels pretty good. All right, morning tea. Thanks everyone.